The Geneva talks have turned into a battle of nerves. Who proved more cunning? Kyiv, the Kremlin, or Trump's team? Medinsky is returning to the negotiations. This is Moscow's death throes. China is quietly crushing Russia. The economy is in China's orbit. Control over Central Asia. Energy aid to Ukraine. What is this? A real geopolitical coup or just empty words? Putin is creating a new intelligence agency under the command of his former bodyguard. The Russian National Guard is now not only a force, but also the Kremlin's political machine. What is the bunker boss so afraid of? A popular uprising or a coup within the elite circle? The truth that will shock everyone. Don't miss it. All the most important news right now. Hello. Today our guest is Abbas Galyumov. Nice to see you, political strategist. Today we will discuss important topics revolving around Ukraine and beyond.
Hello, I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. Let's start with the talks in Geneva. How did they differ for you from the negotiations in Abu Dhabi? And who is playing this card more interestingly, more professionally now? Is it the US, Russia, or Ukraine? You know, what happened in Abu Dhabi is largely a mystery to me. I think for many of those following the events in the media, without access to any confidential internal information, it's also a mystery, because why did the head of the GRU on the Russian side suddenly become the main negotiator when he wasn't in Geneva again? Well, it's just that.
Well, Medinsky showed up in Geneva again. You know, the question arises earlier. Why before that, Medinsky, then suddenly the head of the GRU, and then Medinsky again?
They were afraid of Budanov in Abu Dhabi.
I don't know. This is all this, and this story was accompanied, let me remind you, by an assassination attempt on the first deputy, the aforementioned head of the GRU.
Yes.
And these two things coincided directly, and if initially I was inclined to believe that this was the work of Ukrainian security forces, Ukrainian special services, yes, well, because, as they say, why scratch your left ear with your right hand when it's right there on the surface? Yes, that's the simplest explanation. There's a war going on for Ukraine. They are, of course, an enemy. Ukraine has repeatedly carried out, similar operations behind Russian lines, yes, so, well, another success. But then, doubts began, Firstly, Ukraine began to deny it. Yes, before that, Ukraine hadn't denied such operations. Secondly, behind the wall, as they say, well, in the Russian ruling establishment, the theory is actively being discussed that it wasn't the Ukrainians this time.
Yeah.
That it was the Chekists, that is, some kind of conflict between the FSB and the GRU. Recently, a new man, an extremely aggressive General Kachev, became the head of military counterintelligence, that is, those who oversee the army, including the GRU, from the FSB. He's politically aligned with Sechin, the head of Rosneft, formally not much, but in reality, well, firstly, Rosneft has pissed itself into so much that it's Russia's largest oil company. Secondly, he's, well, Putin's right-hand man, basically, for many years, even back in his St. Petersburg days, a friend and leader of the Russian hawks. Yeah. The most hardcore, right. He has a reputation for being an absolute thug. His nickname among the Russian elite is Rhinoceros. You know what they say about a rhinoceros. He has poor eyesight, but given his weight, that's not his problem when, well, the boss is such a rhinoceros, and he's the same size, right? Well, in principle, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of some kind of conflict connected to the new head of counterintelligence's desire to subjugate the GRU.
But, well, that is, let's remember Darwin. The internal struggle, the most fierce. In fact, the struggle for survival within a species is more fierce than the struggle between species. And in Russia, well, I don't know how applicable this formula is to real, so to speak, biological life, but it certainly applies to Russian political life. Well, because by achieving victory over a common enemy, you sort of gain something that will be divided between you and your opponents in the apparatus. Victory over Ukraine, let's assume for a second that they managed to achieve it. Oh, well, it will be divided equally between the GRU and the FSB. But what you gain internally, within the internal struggle, is already your personal business, and, as we know, your own shirt is closer to your body. So, well, I repeat, this applies to Russia. Exactly, right, and in general, I wouldn't rule it out. And this greatly complicates the situation.
That is, why did the head of the GRU go there to negotiate at the very moment when such things are happening here? His first deputy is being shot. Well, it seems to me that if we look now at the negotiations that took place in Geneva, Medinsky has complicated the situation again, because in Abu Dhabi, we made a little progress, I think, yes, along the military track, and there were some common ground, some specifics already.
And what was that? And how did it manifest itself? We made concrete progress, because I also heard, and this is the second mystery, which I didn't have time to mention, I was going to say that this is the second mystery of Abu Dhabi. So, everyone, including the Ukrainians, is saying that progress has been made. So,
the way the media presented the information, everyone concluded that perhaps something had shifted, that things had warmed up. But how exactly is
this expressed? Are there any specifics? I simply haven't seen any myself, so I'm asking you, maybe you saw them, or are you just drawing a conclusion from what was published in the media? Well, that is, all that was published was that the atmosphere had warmed up. No, look, come on, I suggest we write this down in a riddle and not take it for granted that this was actually the case. You see, both sides see their most important task as impressing Trump. They see that Trump is angry, so to speak, yes, yeah, and the Ukrainians, by saying that, well, you see, things have warmed up, so to speak, they are demonstrating to Trump, well, their positive attitude. Well, that is, they haven't dug in their heels, as he suspects, but they're trying, they're really looking for. Where's the positive in the Russians? Oh, hooray, finally there's some positivity. Quote, you see? And Trump likes it. He sees that the Ukrainians aren't messing around, but genuinely want to finish this. This statement could just be a show for Trump if it's not backed up by specifics. I'm writing all this down, as they say, in the investigation's mystery. I'm not asserting anything, but I'm simply saying this. When I was asked about Abu Dhabi, I said, Abu Dhabi is a complete mystery to me.
And what was the mystery to you in Geneva?
Well, it was a little simpler in Geneva. Medinsky arrived and ruined everything.
But we've returned to the days of the Istanbul talks. And all this is
understandable. No, really, I'm joking. I'm precisely against the comment, I know, that Medinsky ruined everything. I'm actually against holding Medinsky responsible for screwing things up. Medinsky isn't playing games on his own right now. He's too serious a courtier, too experienced, to screw anything up unless he has a mandate to do so. All things being equal, Medinsky is inclined to negotiate. That is, he's definitely not a hawk. Lavrov is a hawk. He belongs to the hawk camp. Yes, he initially disliked Sechin, but now, as fate would have it, he's been subjugated by Sechin, subjugated by Sechenov, by Patrushev, and has found himself an ally of Sechin. So he's no longer twitching. He's been a hawk for a long time, and, well, the clamor of an exterminator, so to speak, is an organic sound for him. Medinsky is more oriented toward Katerina Tikhonova, the president's daughter. They're not hawks. This is the next generation that will come to power, replacing the Sechins. And they, well, they're not adding any additional negativity, that is, don't think they're against war. Of course not. How can anyone be against war if the Tsar is for it?
Yeah.
But they won't be adding any additional negativity. And if the Tsar suddenly says, hey, that's it, we're done, they'll be delighted. And they, in fact, all things being equal, will push the Tsar to end it. They're in favor of conflict with the West, so to speak, not like this, not fighting like this, spilling blood and
destroying their own economies. But what's called soft power? Well, we didn't succeed the first time. Well, let's try again. So what? Are we actually succeeding in fighting? It's not working out that well either. So let's go back to the old track and bribe. Engage in propaganda, and control the internet. You've just taken the bribery thing right out of the blue, talking about, the $1 trillion deal between America and the Russian Federation, about the energy deal. How realistic is it to pull it off behind Ukraine's back? And does Ukraine have any leverage to stop this deal from happening?
Appealing to public opinion, effectively working with public opinion, American public opinion. That's it. Though, you have to be careful here. Playing too aggressively in this arena. Trump won't like it, yes, it's his arena after all. But nevertheless, playing carefully is the only way to block this deal, because, of course.
It is. Well, not on paper.
But negotiations are ongoing. In fact, you can rewind and remember that a year ago, right as soon as Trump came to power, the first negotiations between Dmitriev and Utko took place in Erda. Right after that, I've talked about this repeatedly, across all Russian state-owned companies, well, across large state-owned companies, across many private entities, there was a wave of orders from the Kremlin to prepare documents, proposals for cooperation with the Americans. And as for Dmitriev, I know this well, because
many people were given the order. And, accordingly, well, as someone who once worked there, I still have some contacts. And the people there, well, since they were preparing documents and, as they say, to the old man's village, yes, there, well, that is, it's unclear, well, figuratively speaking, there, the Polito company there, yes, it
assessed and explored its reserves. For example, the last time it did so was 5 years ago. And they start calling. They're told to prepare a proposal for cooperation with the Americans for the most valuable deposits. 4BC recently analyzed government procurement and found that Russian government agencies purchased VPNs worth 20 billion rubles last year. If you think about it, this is, of course, absurd. Amid a rapidly growing budget deficit, when public sector salaries are already in short supply, as in the 1990s, the government is creating problems with one hand, slowing down or blocking various internet services, while spending money to compensate for them with the other. Basically, my point is that since officials are stocking up on VPNs en masse, unfortunately, citizens now also can't do without them. You already know that my team of specialists and I have created our own VPN service. It's not for officials, but for those who prefer to think for themselves, not to chew on the information bubble that propaganda tries to feed them. Please buy it. It offers both monthly and annual plans. Buy it and put Roskomnadzor in its place. Wonderful, isn't it? They're calling the presidential administration, and they were told to submit all the documents to Maxim Oreshkin's office. He's the deputy head of the presidential administration, who oversees the economy. He was put in charge, so to speak. So, the order goes out to a lot of people, right? And Oreshkin is the one in charge. So, he collects documents from everyone and passes them on to Kirill Dmitriev. That's it. And so the calls to the presidential administration started, so to speak, in favor of gold. So, our last appraisal was 5 years ago. What should we do now? Submit it as is, or urgently, give us a month, we'll conduct a new revaluation. Well, I don't know, a month, 6 months, however long it takes, we'll conduct a revaluation, and there will be a fresh revaluation. And there were a ton of questions like that. A bunch of people were calling each other, discussing, say, Gazprom calling Rosneft, asking, yes, that happened. I understand that people, well versed in Russia's internal realities, are saying, well, what nonsense. So, from Gazprom to Rosneft, so they'd call. Quote, that could never happen. Because, well, everyone knows that historically, Rosneft, Sechin, and the Gazprom mafia, Miller, Zubkov, Medvedev, they, well, simply hate each other with a passion.
But it's true, there were phone calls between them to the vice president of Rosneft. I forgot his last name, it starts with an M. He's an American, by the way, an American citizen.
Yeah, they
put him on a set of documents, well, on a set, and tasked him, among other things, with consulting with Gazprom. That's why there were phone calls between them. Okay, those are the nuances. I'm just saying it just in case someone, so to speak, who knows what they're talking about, catches me out.
Well, those are interesting details. So, basically, and so they call each other and say, have you presented the documents? And how is that? Quote, and that's how it is. Well, in short, there was a wave of calls, discussions, and therefore, and since the topic was, well, terribly relevant, important, everyone understood what was being discussed. Well, that is, whether we would be able to reach an agreement with the Americans or not. Everyone understood that it was about trying to buy Trump. Well, it was widely spread, yes. I talked about it then. So, in particular, about companies about these 3 projects. I remember talking about, well, exactly the Rosneft project, which is called Vostok Oil. This means oil production in the north on the coast, of the Arctic Ocean. Here, to the right of Taimyr. There, if you look at the map, to the right, to the east, where Dorinka is, that means they have very difficult production there. And they themselves do not have the technology. Russia does not have the technology necessary to produce in such difficult conditions. And there was an offer to the Americans to enter this project as part of, a barter deal, like oil exchange equipment. That is, you give us the equipment, we give you oil, and this oil is already yours, yes, and you can calmly take it, it's American oil, not Russian, and you can easily export it with these icebreakers, well, not icebreakers, but tankers that follow the icebreakers, and trade it, so you mean calmly. And what exchange rate do we use? Well, let's say, 1 bolt in exchange for 1 liter of oil, right? Well, that means it's equipment for oil. You set this exchange rate yourself. Well, that means, what do you think is fair? So, it's essentially bribery, yes, such a real bribery, yes, it's such a cool geshesh. There you go, dot. And so, the second scheme also concerns Rosneft. They have 3 oil refineries in Germany. Well, more precisely, and these shareholdings in 3 refineries, but, in my opinion, under one control and in 2 blocks. And that means these shares were frozen, of course, after 22. There you go. But nevertheless formally, they sort of exist, they're lying around, yes, and Rosneft says, well, like, come to an agreement with the Europeans, lift the arrest and take it over for yourself, yes, at some kind of bargain basement price. That's also a profitable story. And at some point, well, they said that Kron was supposedly supposed to enter there.
So, the third project is trading Russian gas in Europe. It was assumed that some American would be allowed into the Russian market and would buy Russian gas at the domestic Russian price, at some exchange, presumably the St. Petersburg one, and would then pump it through a pipeline to Europe, selling it as American gas. That is, it would formally be listed as American, although physically it would be Russian. And here again is the margin. The whole difference between the low Russian price and the high European one, there, I don't know, 3 times. Well, I don't know, I won't buy it now, I don't follow current prices. Well, the difference there is huge. All this margin will again be with Americans, right? So, I know, there were gold pole projects discussed. I already mentioned them. Oil transportation projects were discussed. Transneft was preparing something there. The Rotenbergs were preparing something. Well, that is, in general, I'm talking broadly, with such a broad net, as they say, they swept it, threw it in, yes, and Kirill Dmitriev took a bunch of projects. Cough. Yeah.
That's it.
And then, well, in fact, in Russia, as I was told, they were looking at all this very optimistically somewhere in March or, maybe, there in April. They even told me that, I think, they mentioned it in early June. Well, in June for sure. Definitely June, I think, even the beginning. Even if not the beginning, well, the middle, the end. Some of these projects should already be operational. Well, that is, like everything is already on track.
Yeah, and what went wrong?
Nothing worked. Then information about this apparently, the leaks stopped. Well, they gave everything to the Americans. After that, only Kirill Dmitriev was involved. So, the people who prepared the initial documentation are kind of out of it. They don't know what's going on. I have no information from Kirill Dmitriev's circle. I have no idea what they're talking about with Vutkov. They may or may not have talked. Then in November, I'm telling you what happened a year ago, then in November, information appeared in ULST Journal that it wasn't just Kirill Dmitriev who was holding secret negotiations with the Americans, but also the 2 Rotenberg brothers, Yuri Kovalchuk, Gennady Timchenko, and Igor Ivanovich Sechin. So, all the oligarchs around Putin, that they were also discussing some business matters with the Americans. And then this information appeared in The Economist. This is the next publication about these trillions you asked me about. That's it, that is, something's going on there, but
Trump said, and it was public, that there are great projects, we will definitely cooperate, but first we need to stop the war. That's why, as they say, Fedor isn't going for Yegor yet. That is, we don't see yet what the Russians have managed to buy Trump, not because Trump is like that, meaning he's magnanimous, selfless, and so on. No, probably, he is. But he's not just a businessman, he's a politician, right? And he promised voters to end the war, and with voters, it's self-importance, of course. Yes. Well, of course, there is, and we need a Nobel Prize, but in reality, he promised voters to end it. Voters took note of this, because it was too bright a promise to do it in 24 hours. Now, the midterm elections are coming up. Trump's ratings, to put it mildly, are not the best. His approval rating has already fallen to below 40. Many sociologists are already showing 36. I don't remember, but I've definitely seen 37 several times already. Someone else has Arch. Well, that's it. He's deeply under, so to speak, deeply underwater. That is, the number of people who disapprove of his performance is somewhere around 15 points, give or take, more than those who approve. And in this situation, we need to at least end the war and show some kind of result. Well, you have a completely different view on these midterm elections that are supposed to be held in America. Because most experts say that Trump will turn around, slam the door, and leave the negotiating process, because we need to focus on the country's domestic policy, yes, on our citizens. But Ukraine and America are.
Not that, look, no, that's an artificial construct. This is the choice. We need to focus on that. Right? We need to focus on everything that will work for us, well, either for the better or for the worse. Well, that is, if you didn't fulfill this promise during the election campaigns, can you imagine some dramatic story happening? There's a shelling, children are dying. Well, this happens all the time.
Right?
Take Trump, he'll keep quiet about this, focusing on something else. So, the Democrats will pull this out. They'll pull it out, of course, they'll make a corresponding video. Here are crying Ukrainian mothers, here are coffins. Damn, this is really turning people upside down. Americans are compassionate people. Yes, for them, of course, their own shirt is closer to their body there.
That is, this is stronger than the domestic agenda of the American people. It's an
artificial choice. This does not mean that the voter, I'm not interested in this, it means I'm only interested in the domestic agenda. No, people, if they hear, if they break through, and with the help of emotions, that's what I said, children's coffins, damn. And that means, well, I'm just, excuse me, reasoning cynically, well, just as a political strategist, I'm explaining to you, yes, look, I don't know, the famous video, so to speak, the day, yes, the election campaign of '64. One of those stories that killed the candidacy of Barack Goldwater, the candidate from the Republican Party. Here, there was also a domestic agenda there. Social Security was also being discussed in full swing, but, you see, it was just a well-shot video, the eyes of a girl and a nuclear flash. And they only showed it once. Yes, and that was enough for everyone to start discussing that, yes, he's a hawk, he'll bring it to war. No, this choice, well, there is a choice, some things dominate the agenda, some don't. But if something like that happens at that moment and the Democrats throw their forces into it and promote this video, then it will break through this and inflation and so on. And that's it. Trump promised us 24 hours, here's the phrase, here he says it, and here are children's coffins. How much has passed? 2 years. That's how he keeps his promise. You understand? This will simply become an excuse to clearly show that Trump doesn't keep his promises. Yeah, it's not even so much about foreign policy. It's just clear proof that he's a trip patch. Yeah, because those 24 hours are memorable. You've gone over it again. He talks about 24 hours, and the children's coffins. And this contrast, oh yeah, it'll kill their Republicans, you know? That's why he can't just up and slam the door. Then, look, the parties are really exhausted. I mean, it's time for them to finish. And Trump will slam the door, leave, and at that moment, Xi Jinping will crawl in, yes, give Putin a flick on the wrist and say, listen, let's finish. Quote, and he'll get all the credit. You see? And what will that look like? Can you imagine what a nightmare it would be? Trump promised, didn't deliver, and Xi Jinping came and immediately delivered. You see? That is. Well, Trump can't just up and leave. Letting someone else seize the initiative. So, of course, he'll be involved in domestic policy, of course, but these are just different departments, different people. Oitkov, then, is involved in foreign policy. Politics, Rubio is in charge of foreign policy, which means a bunch of people are in charge of domestic policy. It's like you have to focus on one thing. Well, Trump doesn't work with his hands, so to speak, you know?
Since we're talking about China, let's talk further. How painful are the latest statements for the Kremlin, for Putin, about them supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity, helping with energy, and, refusing to supply weapons to the Russian Federation, disowning hazelnuts. Is this some kind of mini geo-coup, geopolitical, or is that just a fancy word? Well, of course, no, well, of course, it's unpleasant for Russia, but it's not a disaster. That is.
Obviously, Mr. Xi Jinping decided to show Putin, who at some point imagined that, yes, the Chinese need me so much that they, well, will be forced to support me, no matter what I do, yes. Well, he decided to remind Putin, so to speak, just know, cricket, his heart. Yeah.
There you go. Without getting too big for my britches, yeah. But there's no revolution here. China has always stated from the very beginning that it supports Ukraine's territorial integrity, which doesn't stop it from de facto supporting Russia. And that includes military support and sanctions relief, and the purchase of Russian oil, Russian gas, both natural and liquefied. Yeah, well, there are so many areas of support, I won't even list them all. The experts there give it point by point. Well, it's generally accepted that without Chinese support, Russia wouldn't be able to fight. So, in fact, of course, China supports Putin. Yeah. But at the very beginning of the war, it declared that it was for Ukraine's territorial integrity. It's clear why. For its own internal reasons, it has this connection, the Uyghur Autonomous Region. Yeah.
It's Putin, in his madness, and the Kremlin, in his madness, who aren't thinking about tomorrow. About all that rhetoric they spouted about Donbass, this Novorossiya they annexed, these 4 regions, will be used against them tomorrow in relation to Chechnya, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, and so on. Well, China is also a little bit there. The Kremlin lives on this land and thinks about tomorrow, it doesn't think about tomorrow. And therefore, well, so to speak, tomorrow we will deal with tomorrow's problems, but today we need to solve today's problems. So let's talk like this. And the Chinese, unlike the Russians, are strategic, they think 10, even a century ahead. Therefore, with a problem like this Soizy-Anagursky district, yes, with the problem of these minorities, and I'm planning to annex Taiwan. Yes, well, it's necessary, well, we can't give critics a reason to say. So you just, so to speak, yes, supported the separatists, but what, you can do this here, and not those, or something, right? That's why they, well, announced this issue once, well, and didn't really push it. There, well, and now they've decided to remind us again, so that, apparently, Putin doesn't forget.
How quickly, in principle, can the Russian economy be integrated into the Chinese financial circuit, if it isn't already integrated? Because if it's already, yes, if I'm not mistaken, then the gold and foreign exchange reserves are already in yuan, yes, at the central bank. I'm
talking about gas, oil, there's nowhere to sell, that means, except to China. I won't talk about the yuan, I'm not a financial specialist. So, I don't really like talking about what I don't know. There, well, experts, yes, say that the dependence is almost absolute. Well, as for oil and gas, everything is clear. Apart from China, almost no one else is buying. India used to buy, now India isn't buying either.
They're afraid, yes, already. Otherwise, well, no, they're
afraid, but they've calculated. Well, that is, the profits they get from buying cheap Russian oil will be outweighed by the losses they, therefore, are outweighed by the losses they incur due to the additional tariffs that Trump imposed on them. So they're simply looking at what's more profitable, and that's it.
Again, there's this little fuss in the media about Xi and Trump not meeting now, but a little later. What will this mean for the Kremlin and for Putin personally? Well, of course, they'll be nervous all night, because Trump can very easily deprive Putin of Chinese support, and then they'll have to end the war. Russia won't last long without Chinese support, and it doesn't have enough of its own resources. That means China, for China, this isn't a war, it's not some kind of principled thing, right? So, I can dig, I cannot dig. That is, for now, it worked out with Putin's help. Well, firstly, cheap Russian resources, and secondly, well, we're pulling Trump's buttons, creating a topic, yes, where he's asking us for something, in a dialogue, in a dispute, so to speak, well, like, let's talk.
Yeah.
What do we need? Oh, for us not to support Putin, for us to tell him to stop the war. Well, fine. And what about our bilateral trade, by the way, with these tariffs? The issue is hanging for some reason. We need to approve these figures, yes, and that's it. It's just that a trade-off could happen. And tell Trump, well, he's a stingy knight, he doesn't want to overpay, so he doesn't give China what China wants. What?
If he gives it, what if he takes it now, yes, and gives it?
And Putin doesn't know. He doesn't control this issue. Of course, he'll be nervous, he can't dictate terms to either Trump or Xi. He's in the position of a younger brother, who stands with his hand outstretched, so to speak, yes, and that's why it's a risk for him, and he'll be worried.
Well, he's probably worried 24/7, basically, because the latest thing that's appeared in the media is that a new special service is being created in the Russian Federation under the leadership of Putin's former bodyguard. Yes, the decree establishing the general staff of the National Guard troops has been signed. What is Putin so afraid of? A popular uprising or a coup within his own elites?
No, Victoria, there's some kind of mistake here. It's not a new special service being created. It's just that the mechanisms for managing the National Guard are changing. I mean, it used to be managed in some way, I don't know how, and now they've decided to create a headquarters to manage the National Guard. Well, this isn't about
strengthening some kind of control over the people, or the elite.
I didn't see any expansion of the National Guard outward in this decree. It's about a certain amount of resources at the disposal of the National Guard.
and a change in the internal mechanisms for managing these resources. This headquarters is being created. Let's call this territory disputed, since both Russia and Ukraine lay claim to this uncaptured part of Donbass, which is currently in dispute, right?
Yeah. We're calling it disputed, because, of course, it's Ukrainian territory, yes, but since there's a war going on, there's a dispute, so, in short, it's currently being discussed as one of the options for creating some kind of compromise, a demilitarized zone there, yes, which is an American proposal. Well, it's being discussed, yes.
And as an option, back at the end of last year, the idea was voiced that both Russia and Ukraine would withdraw their troops from there. Russia, through Yushakov, said then, but someone has to maintain law and order there, and we'll still be the ones maintaining law and order, it'll be the National Guard. Perhaps this issue hasn't been resolved yet, well, that is, this topic hasn't been taken off the agenda. It's possible that it will be the National Guard that will do it. And, well, at least theoretically it's not out of the question. That is, Putin can still count on it, yes, and that's why he ordered Zolotov, come on, get ready. Well, that Santa Zolotov, of course, is not a very bright person, yes, but he gathered his managers, and he said, well, come on, look, we need to be ready, the boss ordered it. Well, and so they began, so to speak, brainstorming about what they could improve.
So they came up with, let's create a headquarters. Maybe the headquarters will not improve the quality of their work, most likely. I don't remember a single time in my entire, generally considerable, biography, that is, working in Russian government structures, both at the federal and regional level. I don't remember a single time when a headquarters helped anything. I've seen a lot of these headquarters. Well,
to improve the financial situation of those people directly who will be participants in this, yes, the employees of this headquarters. Well, yes. Well, basically the same people are included in them. These headquarters include, that is, who before they were already improving their financial situation there. So, those same people, you know, Stalin led the Soviet Union in 1941, until Germany invaded. Then Germany invaded, and the State Defense Committee was created, and who headed it? Stalin. Well, that is, Stalin remained in power, but the State Committee was created. So, it's probably a similar story there. They have it. Well, that is, the bureaucracy is inventing its own activities. Bureaucracy loves that.
yeah. That's what it.
Well, that's its favorite pastime. It's pushing the issues passed down by the higher-ups and inventing issues for itself. Well, the idea that this very structure, the people who will be involved there, will later be in this, let's call it the gray zone, yes, in Donbass, it's very interesting, because that also suggests that everything is slowly moving towards some logical conclusion.
Well, and Russia wants to complete it, Putin wants to finish. I'm saying he can't fight forever. His resources are running out, you understand? So, of course, they're trying their best to, so to speak, hasten the end.
On their own terms. Well, of course, that's the problem.
Let's put 3 points on it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, with our viewers. We're always happy to have you as our guests.
Thank you very much. All the best. Do Danya.